Let's get right into it. Today, we're doing a strictly objective, totally unfiltered pronunciation diagnostic of the provided audio. No sugarcoating, no pulling punches. We're going to break down exactly where the speech falls short of American English standards, looking strictly at the data behind the phonemes, the vocabulary, and the stress patterns. Here's how we'll break this down today. First, we'll look at the overall diagnostic score, then critical phoneme failures, severe lexical collapse, articulation and elision, word stress deviations, and finally, sentence stress and rhythm. Section 1, our overall diagnostic score, establishing the intelligibility baseline. So, the overall pronunciation score for this audio? It's an 18 out of 100. To put that into perspective, it's just barely scraping past the CEFR A2 baseline of 10. We are well below the mark for functional fluency here. Now, you might be wondering why the intelligibility is so severely compromised. Well, while you can kind of make out the basic grammatical connections, the articulation of complex consonant clusters and multisyllabic academic words, it just completely falls apart. In fact, some target words are entirely swapped out for completely different ones, which literally destroys the meaning of the sentences. Moving on to Section 2, let's look at the critical phoneme failures and dive into the segmental breakdown. Let's talk about the absolute lowest scoring sounds. The voiceless velar stop k scored a 12. It's either totally missing or mutated in key spots, like it's completely gone in the word archipelago. Then we have the central vowel at a 15, which got replaced by an open in permafrost, completely stripping away its R-colored quality. The vowel, also scoring 15, gets severely reduced to an unstressed in Svalbard. And finally, the at a 20. The jaw doesn't drop enough in archipelago, so the sound is just entirely ignored. To show you just how extreme this phoneme shifting gets, take a look at this. The target word is Arctic. But because of a severe vowel shift and palatalization, the speecher actually says a completely different word, architect. When you drop the foundational sounds like this, the entire subject of the sentence changes. It's a total breakdown. And it doesn't stop there. Let's look at some secondary deviations. The affricate, ch, scored a 25 because it's essentially hallucinated into existence when the speaker misreads Arctic as architect. The diphthong o, also a 25, is either flattened or just drops right off the end of archipelago. The voice's fricative, sh, scores a 40. You can hear this in glaciers where it totally lacks the required sharpness and proper lip rounding. And the j in region, scoring a 50, has the right placement but zero native-level energy or clarity. Let's roll into Section 3, severe lexical collapse, focusing on morphological failures. This is honestly one of the most glaring examples of lexical collapse. The target is a specific geography term, permafrost, but the actual speech, it comes out as Palmer forest. The speaker substituted two completely unrelated words, which completely severs the semantic meaning. It's a total disconnect. Let's check out the bottom 5 words that completely failed in articulation, starting from the absolute lowest. At the bottom, with a score of 5, is archipelago. The morphology totally collapses into an unintelligible acapole. Next is permafrost at 10, because of that semantic split we just talked about. Arctic scores a 12 due to the fatal misreading as architect. Svalbard gets a 15, mutating into subbird thanks to heavy consonant cluster elision and wrong vowel substitutions. And then glacier scores a 30, where the syllable boundaries blur and the main fricative is super weak. On to Section 4, articulation and elision, looking at the mechanical failures. Words 6 through 10 in our collapse data really show us how the rhythm gets destroyed mechanically. Experiencing scores a 35 because the syllable timing is so slurred, it literally caves in on itself from the length. Temperatures, also at 35, totally fails at syllable elision and drops a heavy accent on the wrong syllable entirely. Average gets a 40 for failing to reduce the final vowel, making it sound super unnatural. Behavior is at 45 because the final R sound is missing that signature American retroflex. And finally, region at 50, where again, the fricative just lacks native-level clarity. Let's dive into Section 5, word stress deviations and prosodic errors. Check this one out. The target is Svalbard, which requires clear stress and vowel length, but the actual speech gives us subbird. When you combine severe consonant cluster dropping with putting the stress in the completely wrong place, the structural integrity of the word just totally shatters. Here are the bottom 5 failures for word stress. Archipelago gets a 5 because the stress mapping is completely untrackable. The syllables literally don't even exist in the spoken word archipole. Permafrost gets a 10 because it adopts the stress pattern of Palmer Forest. Arctic sits at 12 because it's mapped to the stress of architect. Fourth is experiencing at 25, where the primary stress is just entirely flattened out. And fifth, temperatures at 35, where the secondary stress is improperly elevated, completely distorting the natural shape of the word. Let's wrap up the data with Section 6, Sentence Stress and Rhythm, focusing on syntactic tension. What's wild here is how one simple reading mistake can destroy the rhythm of a whole sentence. The text ends the clause on the preposition do, but the speaker reads it as the verb do. That puts an unnatural end-focused stress on an isolated word, creating this jarring, unresolved syntactic tension for the listener. It just feels wrong. Looking at our bottom 3 sentence stress failures, the absolute worst at a score of 20 is the phrase, experiencing temperatures that are climbing up. The speaker misreads that are as and are, which completely breaks the essential stress links between the verb, the noun, and the relative clause. The syntactic rhythm is just shattered. Next, at 25, is that do versus do mistake we just went over, leaving us with that unresolved tension. And lastly, at a 30 is the opening clause, the Arctic is warming 4 times faster. The stress is so improperly distributed, leaning way too hard on the copula is, which pulls attention away from the meaningful words like warming, 4, and faster. The result? A completely flat intonation contour. So what does this all mean? The data makes one thing crystal clear. Any attempt at advanced correction or fluency practice is absolutely guaranteed to fail unless you rebuild fundamental phoneme and morphological recognition completely from scratch. You simply cannot build a natural English rhythm on a foundation of misreadings and mutated vocabulary. It's just not going to happen. So the real question is, what steps are we going to take to rebuild that shattered foundation?